everyone. You are right. Arrived perfectly on time. We were waiting just for you. Peda's going to put our sign-in sheet in the chat one more time. And I would like to get us going, given that, it's a good thing we're a small group. A lot of folks join us a couple minutes, late, but that's always okay because we know what it's like as a teacher, right? Running home, picking up the kids and running in the house. So we appreciate you being here with us today. We are so really excited to have you all join us. And I want to make sure that we get going here. Oh, I'll let Danny let people in so that I can go. All right. We always begin with the land grant acknowledgement. And as a land grant institution, the History Geography Project at UCLA acknowledges the Tamba Gabrielino peoples as the traditional caretakers of the land originally known as Travangar, which today is it's Los Angeles Basin to the Southern Channel Islands. And like I said, we are so excited that all of you are here. We do have some pieces for you on the slides, and then we'll be sharing the slides with you today. So, you can look forward to checking those out, those of you who have not been with us previously. Okay, things are not going to move here. All right, here we go. If you haven't done so already, please sign in. Like Peter shared with all of you, we are a nonprofit. We are housed out of UCLA, and we'll give you a little bit of that background in a minute. However, we get a lot of our funding by applying for grants, and when we apply for those, they want to know how many people we serve. So you really do help us out in being able to document who we work with. So we appreciate. Sometimes people ask us what's the zip code they want. You can put your own home zip code, or you can put the zip code of your school. Nobody's going to hound you, and it's just data. Our state office likes that data, so here we go. All right, our agenda today, we're gonna have a lot, and we're gonna be doing a lot of talking, so be ready for a very interactive session, workshop. Please be ready to put on your camera for your colleagues, right? We know that a lot of you, like we are tending to children and doing other things. Please, when we are in breakout rooms, please turn on your camera. It's always nice to know who you're talking to and to be able to interact with colleagues. So we ask that. We're going to be focusing on speaking and listening today. And again, I will ask my colleagues to please put in the agenda in the chat for you, sign in. Those of you who know us know that we are located at the UCLA History Geography Project, and our house technically is at UCLA Center X, which is in the Graduate School of Education. And we are also part of the California History Social Studies Project, which are 5 history projects throughout the state that work to support teachers. We are all former school teachers, and we really do take this collaborating with teachers to make history relevant and empowering for students. We kind of take it to heart. We love having folks who tell us, hey, I want to be a teacher leader with you. We love bringing folks on board. We love being able to take teachers with us and showcase your work at conferences and to build curriculum alongside you. This is a number of our partners, school districts, and other collaborators such as museums, Lost LA, the One Archives, and we're very excited about a couple of summer programs with La Plaza and the One Archives that we'll be telling you about. And also we are finishing up some work right now with the Relevancy and History Project. If any of you are out in the IE, we need IE teacher leaders. So, this is who we are. I'm Amparo Chavez Gonzalez. Most folks call me Amps, and I was a school teacher for 9 years directly, and then I've continued to be a teacher coach and a PD facilitator. I've been an educator now for 33 years. I'm the OG on the team, and I'm really excited to be here. I grew up in East Los, and then I came back here to work with the UCLA History Geography Project, and I'll let my colleagues introduce themselves.
Hi, everyone. My name's Danny Diaz, and I don't always wear that outfit pictured. It's just a coincidence. I'm the director of the UCLA History Geography Project, and I also am a former teacher. I taught for 13 years AP US History, World History, and a semester and a half of sixth grade that was really challenging for me. And but I loved it, and I've been here at UCLA for almost 10 years. I'm happy to be here with you all tonight.
Hi, my name is Peta Lindsay, and I am the new Associate Director for the UCLA History Geography Project. And I actually really like that dress, and I don't wear it anymore because I use that picture so much for my headshot. But anyway, I was also a high school teacher until I joined this wonderful team. I was at Venice High School where I taught AP US History, um, uh, AP African American Studies, Ethnic Studies, and other courses. And I joined this group. I came right out of the classroom. I joined this team in October, so I'm still getting to know the position. And I'm really excited to be here tonight and be working with you all.
Thank you, everyone. We see that a couple of you have told us who you are in the chat. Keep it coming. We love to know where you all are coming from and working with us. Ben is not joining us today, right? No. And our other colleague, Ben Wong, who helped us out the last time we did this session, will not be joining us today because Ben was conducting a PD at a school district today. So, God forbid he gets a break, right? But we look forward to having him join us in the future. All right, and these are our teacher leaders. These are incredible teacher leaders. They come from all over the place. I just met with Maya Ruiz yesterday, and we were talking about her lesson and oral histories and community oral histories in the IE. So we're excited. So please, if you're interested, let us know. And this is our faculty advisor. Those of you who have not read Bad Mexicans, man, it is good. Kelly Lido Fernandez works a lot with $1 Million Hoods. She's done a lot about thinking about what incarceration has looked like in the past and continues to look like today, and also the history, that local history of LA and what it looks like across borders and why that's important for us to know, right? All right, here we go. It's Women's History Month, and that's partially why some of you came, right? Because you were like, hey, women's history stuff. So we'd love for you to think about a woman who inspires you and who you are going to be bringing into our shared space. So do a little bit of thinking. Think about why this person is someone you want to bring into this shared space. And we're actually going to go into breakout rooms so that you get to share those wonderful stories of inspiring women in your lives in a more intimate way. And so when Danny's ready, he's going to tell us, and then we're going to go into breakout rooms.
All right, everyone. I'm going to open up those breakout rooms right now.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for coming back. I know sometimes we don't have enough time for this sharing, but we also thought it'd be nice to bring important people into our space and to be in community about that. I'm going to turn it over to Peta, and she's going to lead us through a whole bunch of incredible stuff that she's been working on. I'm really excited. So.
All right, thank you so much, Amps, and hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I am going to go into share screen so we can kind of get into the work that we came here to do today. Just give me a second. Let me hit the slideshow. Okay, so our outcomes. We are going to collaborate to explore resources that are culturally responsive and relevant, engaging and rigorous. And this is Women's History Month. So of course, we're thinking about a Women's History Month focus, and that's going to be kind of the focus of our content for the evening and looking at some strategies and things around that. And we're going to, oops, there we go, model research-based strategies for effectively building, speaking, and listening in the classroom. All right. So basically what we're talking about here tonight is building conversations in the classroom, right? Like that's what speaking and listening is. You want students to talk, but you can't just say talk, right? You have to structure that. You have to make sure that it's happening and make sure that it's happening in ways that are effective and meaningful and facilitating learning and literacy. Let's get started with an exercise. And I think it's kind of an exercise that you probably are familiar with, but this might not be some content that you're familiar with. Maybe you've seen it before, maybe you haven't. So I was an AP US history teacher. And if you walked into my AP US history classroom, you might see something like this. And this would be on the board as a quick write. And I would say, look at these two images and write for 2 minutes. Tell me, what do you know about either of these images? What do you notice? how might they be similar or different? So what do you already know? So just think about that for a second. Do you already know anything about either of these images? What do you notice? How might they be similar or different? I apologize. We should have told you that maybe you might need a little scrap paper or maybe an open document. But I think that if we could kind of model the strategy and take, 2 minutes to think about these images and write, that might be good. So I just set my timer for 2 minutes. If we could just look at these images and just think about, what do you know about either of these images? What do you notice? How might they be similar or different? All right, we're going to take about 1 more minute, just kind of looking at the images, thinking to yourself, what do you know about either of these images? What do you notice? How might they be similar or different? And we're going to ask you to discuss in just a second. All right, 30 seconds. And, if you don't know anything, I have a lot of students, I'll encourage them. This is just, we want to get started writing, right? So if you don't know anything, right, I don't really know. But then go into, what do you notice? What do you see in front of you? All right, 10 seconds. And then I'm going to stop share. All right. That's my timer. So let's stop and go back into our breakout rooms, and let's share what we were thinking about, what we were writing about in those rooms, okay? So let's jump back into the room that you were in before, and let's share out in those rooms. So wait. All right. Are we back yet, or?
I think
Oh, 38 seconds. Okay, there we go.
here we go.
All right, it looks like we are back. Fantastic. Okay, so I don't want to go into share screen for this, but I do want to make sure that everybody has a copy of the slides. So I have a link to the slides right there. It should take you right to that slide, yes, so that you can look at it on your own. And let's have some discussion about it. You can put it in the chat box, or if you want to come off your mic and say something. First off, has anyone seen either of these images before, images like them? Do they remind you of anything? Maybe put that in the chat box. We could also, maybe some of your observations. What did you notice? What did you talk about in your group? How might they be similar or different? You can take a minute to put it in chat. If anybody wants to come off their mic, we could also can say a few things. So we're talking about slide 13. All right, Maria, fantastic. Let's hear, what were you thinking about the two photos?
It actually wasn't the two photos. I was sharing with the group that it reminded, sorry, I was trying to turn on my camera and it's like clicking off. Okay, sorry. It reminded me of, I was at the conference 2 weeks ago and I went into one of the breakouts, and the facilitator showed an image comparing the image of LeBron James with, I believe, the Victoria's Secret model. And she's wearing a mint dress, you know what I'm talking about, and the propaganda poster from World War II. And it like just kind of like freaks me out a little bit when I saw it. So it just kind of reminded me of that. That was my first reaction. And definitely my group, we were sharing that we need to do more of the compare image analysis, that we kind of moved away from that. But it definitely reminded me of that. And I do want to even share that with my students and kind of have a discussion over that. But it just images are powerful and a powerful tool in the classroom. So
Yeah.
I just wanted to share that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. Yeah, we have a great comment from Beverly in the chat box talking about the fact that it says, you know, their group, they talked about very little has changed. Long ago, women worked in the home, and in the contemporary picture, an unsmiling woman is using a mixer still in the kitchen, right? So part of why I chose these images is to create a sense of change or continuity over time, right? So these images are from 2 different time periods. I heard a lot of different groups talking about that, right? That's one of the first things you can kind of see. And looking at kind of what has stayed the same, what has changed. I heard a really interesting comment in the room that I was in. Erica, if you're still there, would you mind sharing what you noticed? You said, like, as somebody who cooks, what did you notice about the image on the right?
The image on the right, it really bothered me because she was at the mixer with no attachment. And I kept thinking, like, what is she even doing? Does she know what she's doing? Um, and it was very like our group was talking about how it seemed very obvious that she's not looking at the camera, and that she was very unhappy.
I think that's interesting. I think that's so important in this conversation, right? So one of the things that people have noticed about this woman on the right who posted this, whose photo we're using for this activity, she is a TikTok influencer. And one thing that people have noticed is that she posts a lot of videos of her in the kitchen, but she's does not have the correct tools, right? And so what does that mean? And like kind of looking at the sort of like performative aspects of what it is that she does. All right. So again, a lot of times when I'm starting off lessons, I will just throw out these images just to get students talking. And we use think, pair, share. So what we just did was kind of a form of modified think, pair, share. But there are some things to think about when you're using think, pair, share and how to do it mindfully. I'm going to go back into share screen now to get back to the presentation. All right, so what we just did, I think of as mindful think, pair, share, and it's a little bit harder on Zoom with adults who are tired after work, but but it does work very, very well in the social studies classroom, particularly if this is something that you use over and over again. Like for me, this is something that I start with pretty much on the first day of class and get them used to the format, and then you can apply it, you know, throughout, right? So think, pair, share. It's the idea that you think on your own, then you think then you talk in pairs or small groups, and then you talk to the whole class. We all know this one, right? Or a lot of us are familiar with this one. It's very adaptable, but think about when you're doing this, how are you supporting students who speak less? So I was an AP US history teacher on the West Side, and one thing that I noticed about my AP US history classes is that they were very male dominated, that a lot of men came into the space with a lot of confidence. They were like ready to go and ready to talk. But a lot of the women who were, you know, very knowledgeable on the topic doubted themselves and really hesitated and weren't putting their hands up as much, right? So what kind of scaffolds and strategies in those situations are you using to make sure that you're hearing everyone's voice? And I just tried to model a way to do like one of the strategies that I use. And think, pair, share, which is when you assign the writing, once you have people talking in their pairs, you know, a lot of people are very comfortable in pairs, but not comfortable in front of the whole group. Walk around and listen, right? And listen out for folks who haven't been speaking as much, but listen for when they make a good point. And sorry, Erica, you were kind of the experiment there, right? Well, listen out and then encourage them to join the conversation. And it makes a big difference. Like sometimes students need encouragement. It makes a big difference when you validate their, you know, what they've already said and kind of pull them out. And a lot of times you want to tell them ahead of time. I apologize, Erica, I should have told you ahead of time that I was going to ask you to share that bit. But just again, thinking kind of mindfully about think, pair, share. So listen out for who's not speaking, boost their voices. This is a way to start building conversation in the classroom from day one, right? And just getting students used to using their voice in the classroom. And it's a way to build community, right? Like, so that opening that we did about the cultural energizer, talking about your mother, or talking about women who inspire you, that's sharing, that's building community, right? You're building those feelings that allow people to become more vulnerable and have better conversations later on. So, you know, start that from the beginning, and it really helps with, you know, subgroups. Culturally relevant topics, varied input we talked about, and, you know, using images, video, things like that. And the other thing is when you're thinking about students, and especially like English language learners and students who need, who need support to engage in speaking and listening, be mindful about how you're pairing them for Think, Pair, Share. Like let's think about like making sure that they're with students who will allow them to speak and, let them make mistakes, but also, support them and not be, not cut them off and things like that. So you also want to be really mindful about how you're pairing your groups. And when you're doing this. So, again, Think, Pair, Share is something that I think we're all pretty familiar with. But, if you think about it, it can be a really powerful tool if we're applying it mindfully for supporting discussion. All right, I see the chat box is going. I'm going to stop share really quick just so I can see what we're talking about. Great. Okay, so let me go back into all right, the presentation. So when we're talking about building and speaking and listening, one of the major things is that we're really trying to increase student talk in class. By some estimates, they say students who are learning English spend less than 2% of their entire school day in oral interaction, right? And that's not going to help students build language skills. They need to be able to use language, right? And we have to build those opportunities. Studies show that teachers tend to overestimate the amount of time that students talk, and they tend to underestimate the amount of time that they're talking. And that's just something across the board. So you do want to think about like, how can I reduce the amount of time that I'm talking? How can I increase the amount of time that they're talking? And keep that in your mind, every day, look for opportunities, right? We have a great resource here where it says where it says productive use of oral language in academic settings. There's a great article attached to that. We don't have time to really get into it. That article talks about building meaningful learning in your classroom, and especially to support ELD learners. And it gives us some good kind of outline for what we're looking for with productive talk, like for this meaningful learning, right? So they say productive use of oral language has depth. The specific idea being discussed is central to the theme of the lesson. It's sustained. So one student's statement is followed by another student's response, right? So they're driving the conversation. It's not you directing questions, right? And a student controlled. Again, the students control what they say, not the teacher. We set up parameters, right? But they're driving the interaction is the idea. And that's kind of the goal for classroom talk. All right. So content-wise, what we're going to talk a little bit about today is a media trend called tradwives. And I don't know if you folks have heard about tradwives, but it is very big on the internet right now. And it's something that you may have heard, that your students may have been involved in or may have been exposed to, but it's something that I've been hearing about more and more. And it's kind of a big media trend that I think deserves investigating and deserves, some discussion in the classroom, particularly when it comes to, particularly during Women's History Month. If you're not familiar with the tradwife movement, I'd like to introduce you to it via this video. So if you, we're going to stop for just a second so I can share this video where somebody kind of explains what the movement is, and we can talk a little bit more about it. So let's start with the video, and then I'll give you a little bit more information. Just give me a second. Just want to make sure that my share screen is set up in a way that allows me to play the sound. Yeah, my sound was not set up. Okay, there we go. All right, so we'll watch just one minute of this video kind of explaining it.
Lately, I've been seeing this thing pop up on social media.
We are going to talk about how you can become a traditional wife.
How I went from a raging, free the nipple feminist
to becoming a traditional feminine woman.
The ways that I live traditionally in our modern world.
I don't understand. What's the point of, arguing with him?
Immaculately made up women gazing wide-eyed into their phones, singing the praises of being a tradwife or traditional wife. I'll let her explain.
If you are not familiar with the term tradwife, it is a woman who chooses to live a more traditional life with ultra-traditional gender roles. So the man goes outside the house, works, provides for the family. The woman stays home and she's the homemaker. She takes care of the home and the children if there are any.
Thanks for that. Though the idea of women being confined to the home while men do things like go outside and work isn't exactly new, the image of 1950s suburban domesticity has been given a new lease of life by the gals on TikTok.
Can you imagine?
All right, we'll stop there. So I don't know if folks have reactions in the chat box, or if this is something that you've heard about before, or seen, or something that your students have encountered. But it is something that is very, very popular in the media right now. And the issue is, let me go back to, give me one second, share screen. The issue is not, many women choose to stay home, and we're of course not judging women who make that choice, but the trad wife movement is about recruiting women to a set of ideas. And a lot of these ideas are explicitly anti-feminist, explicitly anti-women's equality, and often linked to white supremacist views. A lot of it, once you start digging, ties into like great replacement theory and the rising white supremacist movement. The woman who I showed you in that initial slide, her name is Nara Smith. She's 23 years old. She has 2 children, and she is pregnant with the 3rd on the way. And she has 2.7 million TikTok followers, and she is a trad wife influencer. So she spends a lot of time, looking very pretty and kind of posing with kitchen equipment in these ads that, I think are kind of reminiscent of the 1950s. And I think that's intentionally so. There's a little bit more info about her and her husband, Lucky Blue Smith. They're both models linked in there. There's some suspicion that their work is funded by the Mormon Church. I'm not going to get into it, but that's one of the kind of suspicions about where this movement is coming from and, the dominance here. And folks, if you have any questions about this, thoughts, anything like that, please put it in the chat box. All right. So I've talked to some teachers who were like, talking to students about the trad wife movement and wanted to and are concerned about some of the messages their students are getting on TikTok. I know that I was starting to get a lot of that, and students bringing in, random TikToks and being like, what do you think about this? And before TikTok, it was YouTube videos, right? Students were getting a lot of messages on YouTube videos they were bringing into class. And so what I really think that the issue here is, what we think the issue is, and something that can really help with this, is something called critical media literacy. And this is a framework developed by UCLA professors Jeff Scher and Douglas Kellner. And the idea is that TikTok is just a form of media, right? And TikTok is the dominant one right now, but tomorrow it's going to be something else. And so it's not like as much about answering these individual trends and videos and things like that, as it is about giving students the skills they need to critically evaluate any media. Like, we know that young people are completely inundated with media right now, right? And so we should be guiding them and helping them evaluate any of these messages, where they're coming from. And I put some examples about things that teachers are concerned about or have expressed concern about, right? Like things like Andrew Tate, the Proud Boys, self-image, right? That comes from, social media issues. The election is coming up. Students are going to be getting a lot of information about the election from different forms of TikTok and media, right? And so I think it's really important that we think it's important to be teaching students how to moderate these messages and, how to think about them. So this framework was developed by Dr. Jeff Scher and Douglas Kellner. If you look on the side, I'd like to give you all like 2 minutes to review the framework. If you have the slide, if you guys are on the links, if you're on the slide deck, I've linked it there, so you can just click it there. But let's take a couple minutes just to look at it and see if you have any questions or anything like that. We'll just take a minute. So folks, if you want to click on that link for the CML framework, we're going to use it in an activity in just a second. But let's just look through it now. And these are a set of questions, a way of approaching any form of media, right? You can use this with historical photos, you use it with TikTok videos. And the goal is to get students to think critically about, how this media is made, why, and kind of ask those important questions. All right, so I'll give you, I tend to be one of those teachers who gets impatient with wait time. I'll give you 30 more seconds. I'll be quiet to look through. All right, any questions about the framework so far? If you want to use your mic or put it in the chat box. All right, I'm gonna keep going. Okay. So I want to show like an example of how we could use some speaking and listening strategies along with the critical media literacy framework to kind of historicize this issue of trad wives and look at these issues of like women's representation in the media, versus reality, and kind of getting students to examine some of these messages, some of this representation, and things like that. We're going to use a strategy called Save the Last Word. I don't know if folks are familiar with Save the Last Word, but it's a way to structure partner discussion that focuses on listening as well as speaking. It's a good scaffold for people who are shyer in the classroom, people who may doubt themselves, or people who are just developing their language skills, because it forces other people in the partnership or in the pair to listen to them, right? A lot of times we get into these even small groups, the more dominant person will talk more. This is just a way to kind of equal out the time and make sure that everyone is heard, and it makes folks work on their listening skills as well. So today we're going to look at images and we're going to contemplate some of the questions from the CML framework with those images. But we're going to use this this structure where one of you is partner A. So whoever, like, let's look at our first names alphabetically. Whoever's name comes first is our partner A. Whoever's name comes second is partner B. So first partner A will speak for 2 minutes. And then partner B will respond for 1 minute. And then partner A can respond for 30 seconds. Usually for each photo, you would do 2 rounds. So like partner A gets to start off talking for 2 minutes and then the responses, and then you go to partner B and they get to talk for their whole 2 minutes, right? But in the interest of time, I think we're just going to do like partner A for the first photo, partner B for the second photo. Like we'll go a little bit shorter. I think, let's stop share really quickly. This is usually, Danny, do we want to just do pairs for this, or what do you think?
If you want to do pairs, I can do pairs. Just give me a second to recreate everything.
Sorry. Okay, so I think we are going to try to do pairs for this one. And let me just get to the, oh, sorry, let me share screen again. Okay. So I've linked a handout here. I'm going to use the same handout for all 3 rounds. So make sure you click on the handout and we can also drop it in the chat box. The handout has the protocol on it. For round 1, I thought that we would look at images of women in World War II. And so, you know, even when the images, like I like this image a lot, and this is a local California history image. These are women ship fitters working on board the USS Nereus. Even when the images are like kind of, you know, positive and empowering the way I feel this one is, we still want students to be critical, right? Like we still want to be examining them, right? So we're going to go into small groups and we're going to start with, or into pairs, and we're going to start with photo A. And underneath photo A, we've chosen 2 of the CML framework questions. So we'll just start sharing that, discussing that, and using the save the last word protocol. So we're going to be in our rooms for about 5 to 7 minutes to discuss those, okay?
7 minutes, yeah. And the folks, just make sure that the handout that Amparo put in the chat is open as another tab in your browser. And so I'm going to open up those rooms. And so you want to make sure that you have that handout available.
Okay, there we go. Heard some really great conversations in the breakout room. So we'll go back over the instructions again. I know for the first round, folks were just kind of getting their bearings for a lot of it and kind of getting a sense of what the resources are and how we're using them. There will be a couple of rounds that we're going to do 2 more rounds. So we are going to try to like stick more to the strategy maybe on the next rounds. But for this one, I heard some great conversation. Do folks want to talk about like what they were seeing? If anyone wants to share, I would love if you came off your mic. You could also share in the chat box. So for those first images, that first image from World War II women workers, we had 2 questions underneath, and I just put them in the chat box. So these are questions from the critical media literacy framework. What values, points of view, and ideologies are represented or missing from this text or influenced by the medium? Why was this image created? So folks have thoughts about either of those questions.
Being that I'm teaching World War II right now, we've been looking at a lot of different stuff. And part of total war and selling the war to the United States was also using women as a secret weapon because they needed the women in the workplace so that the men could go fight. So I said I thought that this was, number one, used as propaganda, that it's another Rosie the Riveter type, you can do it. And at the same time, it also showed desegregation, that it's not just white women that can get out there and work. All of you can get out there and work. We need every woman that's able-bodied to work. And so I didn't notice that at first. And then I went, hold on. When I turned the image and I'm looking at it, I'm like, oh, and that guy's in the background keeping an eye on them with a big old smile on his face. So that was some of the things we talked about.
The man, remember the man.
Yeah, thank you so much, folks. Anybody else want to share? Fantastic. That was fantastic. Thank you. Anyone else have thoughts? Okay, I mean, Diane covered it. So yeah, what we're looking at is, I think it really is wartime propaganda, right? And they say that, I gave a little link on that slide. Here, let me go back into share screen so you can see it. I just linked a little Rosie the Riveter article over there in the corner because they say that Rosie the Riveter is one of the most successful marketing campaigns of all time. So the government went full in on marketing wartime jobs to women. And it was hugely successful. Like women entered the workforce in a way they never had before World War II, right? And so World War II, this advertising campaign targeting women was extremely successful at bringing women into the workforce. And I love that you notice the kind of racial elements of this too. When we talk about the values or ideologies the institution is trying to promote, very much during the war for democracy, they're trying to promote this idea of equality, right? And anyone, Black and white workers can join this factory, right? So absolutely love the media analysis going on there. So fantastic. All right, let's go next. So our next round, so round 2, if you scroll down on the handout that you have, and the handout is linked here, we'll put the link in the chat box one more time. We're gonna go back into those same pairs, and let's let partner B start this time, and let's talk about media in the 1950s. Okay, so before we go into the rooms, I have a couple of different things here. And when we come back, I wanna talk some more about the images on the right. But for this discussion, we're gonna look just at this Van Houston ad from 1951, Show Her It's a Man's World. And what do we think about that? So underneath this ad, you'll see some questions on the handout. And let's try to use the critical media, let's try to use the save the last word protocol. So partner B gets to talk for 2 minutes first, and then partner A, you're responding, okay?
So remember for your protocol, partner A, you got to stay quiet. Partner B just gets to talk. I know that's the hard part. Here we go.
All right, y'all, I'm gonna open up the rooms right now.
All right. Welcome back, folks. I heard some great conversation about that. Does anyone want to share? I can put the questions in the chat box again. So on this one, we're looking at questions 2 and 6 from the Critical Media Literacy Framework. Those are the ones we thought might, pair well with this particular image. And so we're looking at how was this text constructed, delivered, and accessed? So like, where would you find this image and who's the audience? Like, where is it going? What's it intended for? And whom does this text advantage or disadvantage? So like within the text, who is advantaged or disadvantaged? Does anyone want to speak to that? You can come off your mic, or we could, and if you have any thoughts at all you want to throw in the chat box, very welcome. I know there were some strong feelings to this ad, and in some of the rooms folks were reacting. So I know there's some feelings. If folks want to share feelings, we can do that too. And talk a little bit about it. All right, sure, we got Diane one more time.
Well, if nobody else is going to chime in, I might as well. So now you're in the 1950s, and they need to get the women back out of the workforce and back into the home. So Show Her It's a Man's World, very, very sexist. It looked like it was maybe an insert that maybe came with the tie to help sell it, because it has the Van Houston on there. It shows the patterns and all of that. So it's definitely benefiting the man. My partner and I were talking about how they have the woman in a subservient position, not only bringing him his food in bed, but having her kneel and also looking up at him, which were all sorts of yeah. And then the pillows are arranged where it's almost like a throne around him in bed, and he's just got this cocky attitude look on his face. And yeah, they had to get the women back out of the workforce. You did your job, now go home and be a good little girl. And as I was telling my partner, I said, yeah, I probably would not have done well in this time period. my students and I have an ongoing joke about, French Revolution, I would have been killed. This, I would have been killed. That, I would have been killed. This, I would not do well with.
Well, and the reality is, like, what we learned from the feminine mystique is that a lot of women were not doing well, right? A lot of women who were forced into these roles were not doing well. And that's kind of the reality versus the media portrayal. Thank you so much, Diane. Thanks. Okay, so I'm going to go back into share screen, and we can talk a little bit about what Diane just said and kind of what we're looking at here. And maybe some of the things you talked about in your groups. I heard multiple groups talking about that kind of the subservient positioning of the woman, the way that the man is very dominant, even that explicit messaging, right? It's a man's world. And this is from either, it might have been an advertisement, it might have been an insert with a tie. It looks like an advertisement, right? And so this is massive advertising campaigns. Let's go into it. So I want to look at some of the other images that I have here. So Show Her It's a Man's World is a pretty famous one on that Van Houston ad. And then in multiple rooms, people were talking about their own relationship with Van Houston ties and kind of reassessing purchasing those ties in the future, right? But this is just one example. The ad that I used in the beginning is another example, but there are so many ads like this from the 1950s, right? Kind of showing women this perfect picture of this perfect, pretty housewife, right? Like she always is wearing makeup. She's always well dressed. Her hair is always perfect. And she so happy to be cleaning your home, right? And a lot of this came via advertising. A lot of it also came via TV. There was a huge explosion in television ownership in the 1950s, and television was so powerful. And so we had this dominance of these sitcoms, right, with the perfect nuclear family, like white upper middle class, 2.5 children. And you would we were kind of inundated, and women especially were inundated with those images as well. And it very much was part of the process of men had returned home after World War II, time to get women out of the workplace and back into the home. Like, men need their jobs back. Let's get them back into the home. Are any of you familiar with those old black and white sitcoms? I used to watch those. Anybody watch like Donna Reed back in the day, Leave It to Beaver? Yeah. These were insanely popular, right? And this is what was on TV, and TV was extremely popular. And so this forms a lot of people's ideas about what the 1950s was actually like. You know, people get this idea based on this media, that this is what the 1950s were at. Yep, happy days for sure, for sure. I just want to throw in one more piece of this picture. We're not going to do a round on this one, but just to throw it in, when we're talking about that historical context of, you know, first the media and the government, they're working really hard to get women into World War II, and then World War II ends and they start working really hard to get women back into the home, right? Men come home, they need their jobs back, they want women to go home, right? Part of it is also the political context of the Cold War. And so if you're talking about this, you might want to analyze it in the context of Cold War and Cold War propaganda. There was a big idea in American culture, like coming from our government, media, all of that, that the nuclear family was an important defense against communism, that we all had to learn with the nuclear family, you learn to respect and listen to your father, he is the authority, and that transfers over to you learning to respect and listen to the government and take their authority, right? And if you don't have a strong nuclear family, then that's how you end up with a subversive child, right? And so this idea that the communists are targeting your child. And the government's very aware of the power of TV in this time. You know, 1946, there were only 7,000 TV sets. By 1950, TV exploded. Families had TVs all over. And if you notice, a lot of the anti-communist Red Scare, HUAC stuff was focused on media, right? They intentionally went after screenwriters. They went after people who were influential in the media because they knew the power of the media. The primary source that I used to talk about this kind of the Cold War and the nuclear family when I was teaching kids is this propaganda film that was made by the government, is meant to be shown to high school students, called A Date with Your Family. And it's all about teaching kids how they should be interacting with their parents. And it's all about like, never question your father, never express your emotions. Women should be helping out at home. Boys should be doing their homework. It's a great one to get into with students if you want to start analyzing kind of this messaging at that time. Okay, so, but kind of getting into the why. So why are we talking about this? Again, as I was starting to say, you know, the picture that we have in the 1950s, this picture formed off of advertisements, off of very narrow sitcoms, right? That begins to become people's picture of the 1950s, and that influences our political discourse today. And if you look at that trad wife movement, right, a lot of that is throwing back to this kind of fictional idea of the 1950s, and they're recruiting people to this idea of a reality that never existed. This is a quote from Stephanie Coontz, and Stephanie Coontz, they say, is like the #1 like marriage and family debunker. She's a historian. She's really, really good at writing about like marriage and the history of marriage and the family and kind of the unreality of the 1950s. But here's a quote. She says, "The happy and homogenous families that we remember from the 1950s were thus a result of the media's denial of diversity." And she goes on to say, selective memory is not a bad thing when it leads children to forget the arguments in the backseat of the car to look forward to their next vacation, but it's a serious problem when it leads grown-ups to try to recreate a past that either never existed at all or whose seemingly attractive features were inextricably linked to injustices and restrictions on liberty that few Americans would tolerate today. So I linked some links for if you want to read more by Stephanie Coontz. There's an article linked there. And this is also her book, The Way We Never Were, which I strongly recommend if you're interested in talking about kind of the reality of the 1950s. But I think that point is really important, that media created ideas about the 1950s and they're very much informing this trad wife movement, but they've informed a lot of our political discourse. For example, I linked here, if you teach AP US history, one of the things we point to, one of those things that comes up that you will sometimes end up discussing is the Ronald Reagan campaign in the 1980s, and particularly with this advertisement that I linked to down there called It's Morning Again in America, very explicitly goes for that 1950s imagery, the happy suburban couples, the white picket fences, all of that. Okay, so we know that this is what it looks like. This is kind of what they're presenting in the media, right, of the 1950s. This is kind of what we're seeing. So my question here is, what is left out of those kind of media depictions of women, you know, from World War II, from the 1950s? What are some of the things, if you all could throw some things in the chat box, what are some of the things that we're not seeing? Like who was around in the 1950s who's not showing up in these? in these advertisements, in these sitcoms. So we take a second and just throw out some thoughts on that. Reality is missing, yes. For sure. Yes, single moms existed in the 1950s. Yes. The working class, people of color, right? Like, so all of those families are all affluent, big kitchens, like nobody's living in an apartment, right? Things like that. Single dads, right? All of that. Pets, right? But also think about different, I was just going to say that queer folk, right? LGBTQ plus people very present in the 50s, but not in the media, right? And explicitly by Hays Code banned at some points. Fantastic, right? So they're leaving out an awful lot of the reality of the 1950s. And so I think it's important when you're talking about this with students to make these points, right? That we have a lot of media in the 1950s that did not represent reality. And a lot of our ideas about that time period are based on this media. And that's another reason we have to be critical of the media. All right, so let's do our last round about some of the reality then, right? So let's look at some of the reality of the 1950s. So we linked some local photos. So we have photos of actual families, of people of color in the 1950s, of a woman shopping in Chavez Ravine, right? But for photo C, we're gonna use an Instagram post, right? So for the critical media literacy framework, it's great because you can use it with historical photos, you can use it with social media, right? So we're gonna take a social media post that was made by a social media handle called Queerodicals. And it's about Rosie Bamberger, who's a Filipino woman who helped found the Daughters of Bilitis, which is like the first kind of national lesbian organization and really important for LGBTQ plus civil rights, right? And so she's somebody that was in the 1950s. She's somebody who was active at that point, but you would not have seen in the other media, right? So let's go back into our rooms if we can. And just for this last round, let's talk about this little let's talk about this Instagram post and use that same CML framework to examine that, okay?
Okay, I'm opening the rooms now.
Okay, I had paired, again, for this one, I brought back one of the previous CML questions, right? Looking at, so we asked, the two questions we asked for this were social constructivism, which I think is an important one when you're looking at social media posts, right? Like, who made this? Who were all the people making these decisions? Why, right? And then I also brought back that politics of representation question, because that's a big thing, especially on social media, right? These things are being posted so intentionally. They're trying to like bring across certain values. And let's think about that. What are the values that are being imparted? All right. Thank you so much for doing that activity. I think we're going to keep going. And I just want to wrap up by talking about a little bit about the why. And I really do hope that you all can join this conversation in the chat box. So down there it says chat box. What do you think? Why might this be an important classroom conversation? So any feedback about any of the things that we've talked about so far? But this slide, I was saying, why is critical media literacy targeting women so urgent right now? Like, why is this something that we should be thinking about this Women's History Month? And I linked an article that I think is really, really good, really valuable, and might be something you might want to use with your students. It's called "The False Escapism of Soft Girls and Trad Wives." It's in Time magazine, and it's written by a psychologist who works with young women, and she talks a lot about how it may be an alluring kind of campaign, an alluring lifestyle, particularly in this like kind of difficult political moment that we're in. But it's ultimately not what's going to, bring progress or healing or any of the things that young women are really looking for. But she points out in that article that Gen Z female teens have higher rates of suicide than previous generations. We know that 85% of women have experienced harassment online. They say that young women are facing increased risk of disordered eating. They're seeing the rates go up. And this is not happening in isolation. This is also happening along with some big political pushes, right? Where we have 21 states are currently banning or restricting abortion access, right? And this is something that's happened relatively recently, last few years. So this is a moment when young women's leadership is needed, I think, right? And so we got to think about how are we helping young women kind of be empowered, kind of face this moment and be critical of the media messages that they're getting right now. So before we're gonna take a break after this, but if any folks want to say, like, what do you think about this? What do you think about this as a classroom conversation? Just any thoughts so far? All right. Let's go through our break. Maybe we just need a break. Yeah. Okay, I'm seeing nods. It looks like that's the right thing to do. Oh, just really quick before we go to the break, I have this extension. The Gorilla Girls is a grassroots feminist organization. They employ some direct action tactics. They're interesting, but they have this really great little magazine where they do an overview of some of the issues with the way that women are represented in media. And it talks about, and it's really, I love the layout. And it talks about, there's a section on advertising, there's a section on World War II. It kind of touches on a lot of things that we talked about. So if you need a quick reference, and thinking about how we're challenging this in the classroom, we want to think about how are we using, getting students to use media in empowering and authentic ways. So you want to think about like having students do zines, TikTok, podcasts, how are they creating media that is authentic and empowering? Right? How are we pushing back against some of these media messages?
And Angela asked if there's a way for us to adapt this for younger learners. And I think there is. I think young kids know about gender roles and know about what they're being, what is being shared with them in the media around, the largest group of consumers of makeup right now are tweens. And so some of the younger kids are very attuned to that right now. I think it's important to think about what would be age appropriate. And I can think of a couple of books about little girls who like want to jump and want to wear overalls. I can't remember the title of the book, but there's a couple of really powerful books, right? And images of, and we're going to share with you some younger girl activists, right? To also be in contrast. And we're going to come and share that with you when we come back from break. We want to honor that we're all tired. Please care for yourself, stretch, get a drink, get a hug, kiss from your kids, all of that stuff. It's 5:50. Please come back at 5:57. We'll play some music and then we'll come back. All right. Danny has another announcement.
No, sorry, everyone. I'm just going to renumber. I'm going to rename everybody with a number. The number is going to correspond to the activity we're doing after break. So just letting you know.
Right. Thank you, everyone. We'll play some music. Come back when the music ends. Danny, you got music ready? I don't have my Spotify on.
I don't know.
Thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed the activists that you learned about. Anybody, were they interesting? Were they exciting? Talk to me, because I always want to know if I found good stuff or not.
I think mine was interesting, and my partner's was also interesting. One of the similarities, just even scrolling through the list, that we talked about was, all of these women saw something that needed to be addressed, and they had the courage to speak out. And whether it was something small within their community or that started small, it grew. And sometimes it is just giving people the courage to find their voice, and then to show these other great women leaders that have shown their courage and found their voice to help encourage others to do well too. I was at a ethnic studies thing, and something that comes back to me constantly was, if you know better, do better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. Right. Yeah, we try to bring you some younger activists, right? So that we thought like the younger girls that you're working with, the younger women and men in your classrooms could connect with that. But then also young people who had done things locally, and then folks who had done things globally, right? And from lots of different walks of life that we don't always hear about as well. So I think it's important to highlight that. And we were going to have you think about like, so how might this impact the young men and women in your classroom, and sort of encourage them to think about change, right? You don't have to always go out, and somebody, I think, our good friend here said, you don't always have to go and talk at the UN. You can do things starting with your community, right? Like that young activist Nayeli Kobo, right? You can start with the people who are around you and impact their lives, right? And so how do you guys think your students would react to these biographies? Anyone?
Well, I teach fourth grade, but me myself just having read about Polly Murray and In spite of the institutional racism that she's experienced, she didn't care. She's like, well, screw that. I don't care if you're all white. I'm going to apply anyway, you know? So it's almost like pushing the boundaries and not making it, didn't let those things limit her. And her lists of accomplishments were amazing. So I was really pleased to learn about her and really pissed that I didn't know about her.
Yeah, thank you. Right? Like, don't you feel cheated? I felt cheated.
I do. Yes. Yes.
Like Danny reintroduced me to Paul Murray. I was like, oh my God, how did I forget about her? Right. So I think, and the reason why we build these pieces for you in a Google Doc is that you can take that and make it more age appropriate, shorter, longer, depending on your students, right? Some of them are longer pieces, some of them are shorter. And then what we've done, as we've collected, is that we've added at the end of that lots of other ones that you can use, right? And the strategy of the Tea Party, like I said, I use it with elementary school. I've taught 3rd, 4th graders. They love it. They love the talk, just getting up and talking to one another, right? After lunch. You know, it was my after lunch. Let's learn some vocabulary. Let's get excited, right? Getting up. So please, if you revise it, if you add some more folks, let us know, because we think that it's important that there's a shared, right, knowledge, and that we share with one another. So yeah, if you find others and you know of others, share them with us. What we want to do next is we want to just have a little bit of a closing with one another, right? And Peter, I know that you're gonna take care of the closing for us.
I guess so.
Oh, because I didn't write that slide. Sorry, guys.
Oh.
I'm like confused. Am I doing it?
Oh, the extension slide, so 38, that wasn't you?
Yeah, that was you, my dear.
Oh, okay. Well, I sure, let's look at slide 38. But extensions to consider: having students explore their contemporary issues, researching additional pieces of the life of their character, researching historical context, things like that. Basically what we're looking at there. Before we go, I just want to give you, we just want to give you a heads up on some things that are coming up. So we've got one more session in this series of Reading and Writing for Justice. So that is on April 24th. Please join us. We're going to be looking, so tonight was about speaking and women's history. In April, we're going to be looking at writing strategies, and also the content is going to be focused on celebrating Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month. But you know, we're always looking at it through an intersectional lens. So we're going to be connecting to other communities and struggles as well. And on this slide, so we've got it, you all are already registered. You'll be getting the info. Just make sure you join us for that. But this slide is about our summer program. So we've got some really exciting summer programs coming up, and I hope that you all can join us. We're going to be doing a program called Art Forms of Resistance and Literacies of Power with La Plaza Museum de Cultura y Artes, and that's going to be fantastic. So I hope that you're able to join us for those workshops. We're working with a lot of artists, with the folks in the museum. I think it'll be really powerful. We're also doing themes in world history, so something specifically targeted to world history teachers, right, and looking at some of the current issues, and looking at climate change and things like that, like really kind of compelling world history issues today. And we are also doing an LGBTQ plus history teacher symposium. So that one we're asking folks to apply for. But for that, we're going to be spending a week working in the One Archives, which is, I believe, the largest and oldest LGBTQ history archive in the US. So we get access to their materials, and it'll be great. And we're going to be using that and working with scholars to build an LGBTQ plus curriculum. We already have some lessons, but we're trying to really develop more resources. So we're asking teachers to come work with us this summer and help us learn, grow, build those resources. So we think that would be also a fantastic opportunity. So please join us for that. So we got links on those slides, and there is, stay connected. And we have our evaluation as the last thing. So I'm going to stop share and put the evaluation in the chat box. And please do let us know what you thought of all the different strategies tonight, what you thought of our presentations, and give us some feedback. And it was so great working with you all. There goes the evaluation.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.
Thank you all. And we'll stick around for a little bit if you have any questions or if you need anything, but thank you so much for sticking it out. I know it's hard.
And those of you who have spring break next week, get some rest.